Hello everybody and welcome to Forever Rugby on Forever Sports. And yesterday, World Rugby announced the official team of the decade from 2010 to 2019, and some very interesting choices. And we're going to look at it basically sort of and sort of maybe look at some of the positions or we would change. And look, it's a very, very good team. There's no doubt about it. But my biggest problem when it comes to sort of team of the decade is, are we looking at somebody who was really good for like a 3-4 year period? Are we looking at the longevity of it? I mean, somebody who debuted in 2011 and maybe is still playing, played the entire decade, for example, has been top of the game. Are they more worthy than maybe someone who's really, really, really good for, say, 4 or 5 years, but retired in like 2014 or retired in 2015, which a couple of these players did, which I think is why there's a bit of controversy and stuff about them. And we look at the team now, and it's very much dominated by the All Blacks, which makes sense given their dominance across the decade itself. Before we go any further, please do like and subscribe to the channel, bottom right hand corner. Click the subscribe button, as well as turn your notifications so that you never miss a moment with Forever Sports. And jump in the comments, let me know what you think of the team. So here is the team itself. So 1 through 15, we've got Tendai Mtawarira, Bismarck Du Plessis, Owen Franks, Sam Whitelock, Brody Vitalik, the lock combination, Richie Mccall, David Pocock, Sergio Parisi, Conor Murray, Dan Carter, Mar Nanu, Brian O'Driscoll, 2 wings, Brian Habana, and George North, and then Ben Smith at full back. Right. So, looking at there, first of all, I think number one, Tendai Mtawarira is very little debate there. I haven't even seen any comments, anything like that. He was so good, so consistent, so important to the Springboks across the decade. Probably one of South greatest ever players. And just showed his class last year in the World Cup. So no complaints there. Bismarck Du Plessis is an interesting one. He retired in about 2015, 16, pretty much after the 2015 World Cup. We started having to bring in Bismarck. We started bringing Bismarck out and bringing Malcolm Marx into the fore. So look, I think somebody that I think was probably in with good shot is somebody like a Rory Best, who played across the entire decade. I mean, he retired in 2019 and he was playing from 2010. 2 British and Irish Lions tours. Captained Ireland to that historic game against New Zealand. Was part of the sort of the Ireland Six Nations victory and stuff like that. So I think that's someone who's probably in with a decent shot. But it's also always difficult to sort of look at players like right now you look at a Bismarck Du Plessis, even a Brian O'Driscoll, and you kind of sort of sometimes forget how good they were because they did retire quite a long time ago. I mean, something like Brian Habana, and I must admit we'll get to the wings there, but that is always a problem when you have to sit there thinking, were they this good, or are we sort of just romanticizing the fact that they were so good because that was just who we were enjoying at the time? And you think back and you think, oh, remember Bismarck, remember how good he was. So I think Rory Best is somebody who I think probably has a bit of a shot, a decent shot there. In terms of the locks, I don't think there can be much complaint. Maybe a case made for Alan Wynne-Jones. He's just been a stalwart for Wales, plays in week out. He now most capped international player of all time. But I mean, you're not going to argue against Brody Vitalik. World Rugby Player of the Year, 2 World Cups. I mean, he's a beast, an absolute machine of a player. So maybe you could look at Alan Wynne-Jones in place of Sam Whitelock. Delise Trua is interesting, I must admit. I'm a big fan of David Pocock, so I don't think there's too much debate about that. There could be a case made for Jerome Kano. But then Richie Mccall, one of the best captains of all time. So you're probably not going to argue with that. I must admit, I do have a couple of question marks over Sergio Parisi. You do wonder, and I mean, I'm not a New Zealand fan, but when you think of how dominant the All Blacks were throughout the decade, they really were the top side by a country mile. And it's only the sort of last year or two. I mean, even last year when they lost to England, it was a shock. And this year, but I mean, this year doesn't even count. So the All Blacks were the best side by a long, long way. And I think it's fair that they do dominate a lot of the positions. And it's difficult sometimes when you see players who aren't All Blacks there and you sort of think, should an All Black be there, for example? So there could be a case for Kieran Reid. I mean, apart from that, when it comes to sort of number 8, yeah, look, Parisi was very good and very good for Argentina and was a large part of their sort of, I wouldn't say research, but their journey to being one of the top sides in World Rugby. So, led from the front, an absolute beast of a player. So I probably not have too many complaints about that. Conor Murray is one that's caused quite a lot of upset. A lot of people looking and saying, how is Aaron Smith not there? which I can understand because, I mean, Aaron Smith's been so important to that All Blacks dominance and was one of those players, even if he wasn't in the best of form, had to be picked because he could just turn a game around. His game management's so good, and he's just such a well-rounded scrum half. So Conor Murray is one of the selections that has sort of, you know, caused quite a lot of debate. So maybe, yeah, jump in the comments. Let me know what you think of that selection. Dan Carter, for me, there can be no debate. There wasn't a 10 that was better than him in the last decade. I think the next, you know, if you look at like somebody like Andre Pollard who's come in, Bowden Barrett's come in, but you know, I just think that Dan Carter was, you know, he was just on a different level, especially in the 2011 World Cup, and yeah, the most complete fly half ever. So I don't think there'll be too much debate about that. You can't really, I mean, Owen Farrell's been very, very good for England. There's no doubt about that. But for me, he's not moving Dan Carter. You could maybe have an argument for Farrell at 12 ahead of Marnani, but especially during the last decade, only for the last couple of years, he's really made that shift to 12. He hasn't, before that, he was playing most of his rugby at 10. Brian O'Driscoll's quite a controversial one. A lot of people say Conrad Smith, you know, one of the highest win percentages of All Blacks. I think he's got an 88% win percentage, was such a big part of that whole sort of combination. Was in many ways an unsung hero. Lots of people calling for Connor Davies. So yeah, I mean it's difficult because yeah, I don't know. It is an interesting one. Sorry, Jonathan Davies, not Connor Davies. But I mean, Brian O'Driscoll retired in 2014, and yes, I mean, I know you're looking at one of the best number 13s of all time. You know, probably, if not the best number 13 of all time, Brian O'Driscoll. But as I said, it gets difficult when somebody retired so early in the decade. You know, how good do they have to be to have sort of kept that the form for over the decade and be considered the best number 13 of the last 10 years? You know, and same thing goes with the wings. You know, you look at George North and somebody, and the big justification is, you know, he scored 43 tries in the decade. And then you look at Brian Abana and you think he also retired, you know, quite sort of midway through the last decade. I think Julian Savia has a big case. He scored 46 tries in the last decade. He only made his debut within this time. And yes, he kind of fell off over the last couple of years, but when he played, I tell you, I mean, he was breaking records. He was unstoppable. So there could be a very big case for Julian Savia there as well. And this is the problem with the All Blacks being so dominant. And I think that's probably why, if you look at this team, there will always be, you know, a couple of big selections, because I mean, it comes to the case, you never want to put too many players from a certain team in. So you've got to sit there and say, well, the All Blacks were the best side, Ireland were one of the best sides, and the Springboks were one of the best sides. So those probably will make up the bulk of the things, and it is, you know, with the exception of Australia having one player, France having one player, and Wales having one player, but everybody else, you know, South Africa 3 players, Argentina 1 player. But yeah, and I think what's quite interesting is that not a single English player in the side. But to be fair, I think it's an English side which was quite inconsistent, as largely performed in the last decade. But yeah, and then number 15, Ben Smith. A couple of people calling for Lee Halfpenny, which is not a bad shout. But I must admit, I mean, I struggle to think of a fullback over the past decade who was better than Ben Smith. I mean, he was such, yeah, I mean, such an important, I mean, and there were always, and this was, so much was the depth of New Zealand, is that, you know, lots of people like were calling him for and sitting here saying, you know, maybe he's had his best or whatever like that. He just kept playing and kept being so good and so consistent. So yeah, I mean, I don't know what, I mean, it's an interesting side. It's always going to be a lot of debate, because I mean, there are always going to be players that you're going to want to include, and there will never ever be a best 15. So I think the biggest question marks for me are probably maybe Savia for Abana, just in terms of over the entire the decade. Maybe Brian O'Driscoll, Jonathan Davies there, Conrad Smith, simply because he retired so early into the decade. Conor Murray, I suppose. I mean, yeah, another one. Look, I think Greg Laidlaw could have a bit of a shot. I always really liked him, and felt that, you know, in a better side he would have been one of the top players in the world. Sergio Parisi maybe is another one which has caused a couple of eyebrows. Apart from that, I think it's fairly spot on. I must admit, I didn't look at any of these players and think he shouldn't be there. There were a couple of players that you're going, but you know, there was no. I mean, I never went there and said, and I wasn't surprised by any of the picks, which is, I suppose, fair enough. But let me know what you think in the comments below, and please do subscribe to the channel. Back to our Currie Cup coverage very soon. We're going to be having a team of the weekend toasted today, as well as 5 things learned tomorrow before we get into our previews ahead of the weekend's action. So thank you very much for watching, and I'll chat to you very, very soon.